Our next guest is Carlsbad City Council member Cori Schumacher, longtime activist, former pro surfer, and now an elected official. Welcome, Council member.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So what's it feel like to be, I think, the first Democrat elected on the Carlsbad City Council ever, maybe?
Yeah, that's the prevailing story. I feel like I've found my place in the world. I have been doing activist work for a number of years, and this seems like the next logical step. I've been enjoying myself tremendously. For
our viewers who may not be so familiar with Carlsbad politics and your race, give us a short bio of yourself.
Okay. Well, I was born in Huntington Beach, moved down to San Diego when I was about 2 years old. Spent the majority of my time in Oceanside, Encinitas, and then landed in Carlsbad about 12 years ago with my wife. And really just built my nonprofit, finished up a third world surfing title, and wanted to dedicate myself to giving back to the sport and to the folks that had inspired me growing up. So I think one of the most important aspects of sort of my world perspective is pretty typical of a surfer. It's aloha, which is giving, a giving spirit or a giving back spirit. So whenever anybody says surfing, for instance, is selfish, I always laugh and shake my head and say, not the way the old Hawaiians taught me. So that kind of dovetailed my activist sort of environmental justice, social justice, and economic justice work, dovetailed into about 2 years ago when I walked into City Council and watched a vote being taken away from the people of Carlsbad.
That was the Caruso project?
That was the Caruso project, yeah, which eventually turned out to be Measure A, and sent shockwaves through the building industry in San Diego County, and how citizen initiatives are run, and also how communities organize around really large moneyed efforts by developers. So at the end of that effort, which really saw me falling more and more deeply in love with the residents of Carlsbad, they asked me to run, and I decided to use my campaign as a way of hopefully reunifying Carlsbad, because we had been so divided for so long. And we were successful with a very positive campaign. Ended up getting elected, and 4 months on, and it's fascinating work.
But isn't it, you talk about bringing people together.
Yeah.
I've heard that there's been a lot of 4-to-1 votes with you on the one side.
Sure.
Isn't that somewhat frustrating as an elected official to always be in the minority?
No, and I think that's because I've been in the minority for a large portion of my life as a gay surfer, as a woman surfer, within a culture that is largely dominated by white males who are straight. I hail from a culture that is the old boys club, and learned very quickly how to use my integrity to build trust with folks who want to see change. And the thing that they want most, and that's where my alliance lies, is with the people, the thing that they want most is a voice to highlight their concerns. So if I'm a 4-1 vote, it's my ego doesn't get in the way. I know I'm doing my job.
Had you participated in any of the community meetings involving Caruso? I know he made a big deal of, oh, we've been here for a couple of years, talking to people, trying to craft the project that we know the people want. And I think a lot of observers anticipated, oh, because of that, this will be a smooth process. And then you and your group came in sort of out of nowhere. Was it really out of nowhere, or had you already kind of been part of those scoping meetings or those meetings and were unsuccessful in getting a vision?
So it's, I think, important to make a distinction right off the bat with the difference between myself and the Citizens for North County. And I think that's the group that you're talking about as far as being involved from the beginning, and then the group that kind of came out of nowhere. I ended up coming in at that August 2015 council meeting where the vote was taken away. So I didn't personally go to any of the scoping meetings or any of the community outreach that Caruso did, but I can say that typically the way that Carlsbad encourages its developers to go out and do community outreach, it's typically a, here's what we're doing, and the public input is shuffled aside and kind of doesn't make a lot of impact. That's prior to Measure A, I should say.
Okay.
Post Measure A, I think that there is somewhat of a different perspective from developers on how to take and I guess, employ community input. So, and I think that that's one of the best outcomes of Measure A, is that we're able as community folk, rather than under a 501(c) or under a sort of an environmentalist banner where you have an organized group where individual citizens are coming up and saying, here's what we want to have changed, and developers are a little bit more willing to listen, knowing that there is a highly organized group of people who are at the ready to deploy.
What has surprised you the most about moving from one side of the aisle to the other? Now you're, you know, a couple months into actually the governing part. Anything catch you by surprise, or, you know, anything? Has it been harder than you thought, or about what you expected?
It's about what I expected, and I think the biggest surprise that I have is really how hungry people are for difference and for change in Carlsbad. And I think that's one of the things that you know, from both within and outside of City Hall. Not having a voice, regardless of what type of a group or a person that you are, it kind of leads to this learned helplessness, which is a term that we use in domestic violence, right? If you learn over a long period of time that your voice doesn't matter, then it's not going to seem as though there's a large portion of people who actually want to enact change. So the most interesting thing for me is now that I'm listening to folks and speaking, there are more people coming out of the woodwork contacting me than I had initially thought.
Can you give us some examples of what change to the nature of Carlsbad people are saying they want?
Sure.
That they haven't seen before?
Having a voice for the residents. So we've got a lot of advocates in the city for developers. We've got a lot of advocates within the city for visitors and for stakeholders in the tourism industry. This is largely oriented around trying to draw more dollars into Carlsbad and treating Carlsbad like a corporation rather than a government that is really socially based. So I would say, yeah,
Okay.
residents.
So, but what, I mean, I wanted just...
I might have lost myself on that thought there.
It's just that there may be some issues, specific issues that you can think of where...
Specific issues.
That people are saying, you know, we feel strongly about this, but we're not getting our voices heard. What kind of things are they feeling strongly about?
Oh, well, the first thing I can tell you is a moratorium, a building moratorium in the village and the barrio. That's a really big issue right now. So we're right in between a village and barrio master plan, which would reshape or really shape the identity of the village and the barrio area, which is really where our identity as a city arises from. And folks have been asking for development to stop until we have this new village and barrio master plan in place. Hasn't been listened to. Finally, we're starting to get some traction with the Planning Commission just last night saying, all right, we're going to discuss this. So that's one really large issue. And development, of course, you know, everybody knows is a really big issue. So affordable housing, of course, is another big issue.
Well, don't those two things sort of go head to head in the sense that if you say stop, we don't want any more development, you're going to get more expensive house prices? So
well, I think so. One of the conversations that I think gets marginalized pretty effectively by folks on both sides is this idea that citizens are somehow not detailed in their thinking about affordability and development. So the way that our citizens are constantly portrayed, and I see this in other cities too, is that our citizens don't understand the nuance of development that should require affordability. Typically, when we're talking about affordability in Carlsbad, though, we're talking about moderate income, moderate housing, right? At 81% and above for AMI. What folks in Carlsbad aren't seeing is affordable development that falls within the very low income range. And so I've seen a few developments, like a recent veterans housing that went in that has homelessness.
At the Denny's site.
No, actually it's further south on the other side of Carlsbad.
Well, you just approved one too also, right?
That's the lofts.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so that's
not affordable?
60% of AMI. So when we're talking about affordable, again, that's 50% and lower is
Got it.
the real affordability that we're talking about bringing into Carlsbad. So the veterans housing tackles homeless veterans as well as the 50% and below. And that type of housing that type of development actually gets quite a broad base of support, even from those that folks typically like to call NIMBYs, right? So I'd be an advocate for the citizens actually understanding the nuances between affordability and development and not being solely opposed to development.
You mean they might
across
be
the
more
board.
in favor of development if it included more 60% and below,
Right.
you know, affordable housing for
Right.
people who earn 60%
Yeah.
of it.
Was that Barrio project that was discussed last night, was that what, that was an affordable housing project too, I thought, but right on the edge, like
The
Tamarack.
Pacific Winds. Yeah.
So was that truly affordable then, or what range did that fall in?
I haven't actually had a chance to take a look at that.
Okay.
Pacific Winds.
Because it
just
seemed
went to
like
Planning Commission.
there's a lot of pushback against that.
Right.
In the Barrio neighborhood.
Right.
Because,
So here's the underside of this beast. If you're not listening to your citizens over and over and over again and actually acknowledging the fact that they have a nuanced understanding of development and affordability, they're going to say no to everything because they don't trust you. And that's the conversation that I've had with a number of people inside of City Hall. Is the very first thing that we have to do is amend, fix, really get down to brass tacks around our communication. This isn't about branding Carlsbad a particular way. This is about effective and authentic and real honest conversation in our communication, and then rebuilding trust with the community. And I think that actually starts with a moratorium.
If people that you talk to agree with that idea, how do they square that with putting cameras to record all the license plates coming in and out of the city?
Square with the idea of not trusting the government and then allowing them to go into surveillance. I think that's probably why you have such a huge backlash, on top of the issue of frivolous spending for something that we don't actually need.
Did you were opposed to that?
I was.
Principally on the money side, or privacy issue, or trust issue, or can you talk about that?
Sure. 3 different reasons. The first is I didn't see data that revealed the need. Second, it's not a preventative tool, which is how it was presented. And third, privacy issue. So taking a look at the data over 36 years, Sandag is showing that where we're at currently is the second lowest crime rate in that time period. My understanding of what we need in Carlsbad is actually not surveillance, but more officers, more sworn officers. So we've doubled our population since 1995, but since 1995 we've only hired 30 sworn officers.
And that's what percentage additional?
Oh gosh, well, we started out with 85
Okay.
in 1995, so.
But
Okay.
the officers might argue, but that's exactly why we need more surveillance, because we don't have enough eyes to be able to see, so give us cameras instead.
Which would be a good argument if you could actually show that there is an increase in crime that's a spike, right? So in 36 years, again, in 2016, we have the second lowest crime rate since 1981.
We have about a minute left. How
Sure.
fierce is the backlash?
How fierce is the backlash for the license plate readers? It's pretty intense. It's pretty intense against the license plate readers.
How's
So,
it showing up?
emails, I get phone calls.
And to your council, your council colleagues as well?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're really out of time. Thank you very much for coming in. Good luck with your position.